Welcome to the Creative Play and Podcast Network. Join us as we share our favorite RPGs, one-shot games, tabletop games, reviews, and convention panels. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Kelly, aka Trixie from Ragnarok and Roll, assigned to Ragnarok Story, and Tilda Wimblewick from D&D Journey of the 5th Edition. First off, I would just like to say thank you to everyone for listening to our varied adventures, as well as for rating us on iTunes and rpgpodcast.com. If you haven't rated us yet, we would greatly appreciate it if you could. And if you're looking for more ways to support our efforts, we are now on Patreon, a great site where you can help us continue making more podcasts, as well as some special surprises for our patrons. If you can, please look us up at www.patreon.com/cppn. Every little bit helps. And again, thank you for listening.
Thanks for waiting. Sorry we're late. We got lost. I got lost.
Easy to do.
Hey, how are you? Hi, nice to see you.
I like that shirt.
Thank you.
That is a
I like the
good shirt.
tiki style and all that stuff. And somebody messed up my badge too. Brad Pitt. Happens all the time. It's either Brad Pitt or Chris Evans. How are you guys today? You have a good show? A good weekend? Yeah. Thanks for waiting. We did actually get a little lost.
They're very high mics.
Oh, they're very.
Can you guys hear us really well in the back? Yes?
Justin's car.
So even though everybody obviously knows who you are, I'm going to introduce you.
Sure.
From humble beginnings with a self-published comic in the 80s to global empire spanning toys, cartoons, video games, and blockbuster films, his co-creation of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles changed comics forever. Please welcome the legendary Kevin Eastman! Questions. I don't know how you would like normally to do this. I have questions for you, and then I would like to turn it to the fans, if
That's perfect.
if that's okay.
Yep, that's awesome. I love
So, my first question for you, what was it like the very first time you and Peter Laird realized the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles might be something bigger than just a fun one-off comic?
You know, what's so fantastic is, first let me say, thanks for making me feel so awesome and welcome here in Tucson. We've had such a great time. We've heard wonderful things about the show, and you guys did not let down at all. We've had just such a wonderful time the last couple of days, and thank you. And most importantly, I have the greatest job because I have the greatest fans. So I appreciate you guys coming, standing in line, hanging out with me. That's awesome. Couldn't do it without you. Sincerely, heartfelt. Thank you.
Thank you.
The thing with our inspiration for the first issue of the Turtles was our love and passion for Jack Kirby, and I'm sure most of you know who Jack Kirby is, created or co-created most of the Marvel Universe. And he's the one that installed the passion for both Pete and I to want to write and draw and tell our own stories, because it was one of those things when you realize if you can think about it, you can write it, and you can draw it, past, present, future, anything you want to do, you could tell these wonderful stories, fantastical, made up, whatever you wanted to do. And that was something that Peter and I bonded over immediately, and so we formed a studio called Mirage Studios, and it was a mirage because it was our living room. Pete and his wife had a house that they had rented in Dover, New Hampshire, and I rented a room from them. And so we would sit in the studio and brainstorm and come up with ideas and submit, art samples and ideas and all this stuff to Marvel and DC and all these places. So we just ended up building up large stack of rejection letters, and but we weren't going to let that stop us. We said, it's something we wanted to do since we were kids, to the point where I kept telling my mom and dad when I was younger, I want to be Jack Kirby when I grow up, and they gave me that look where, oh my goodness, we're going to have one of those kids that never moves out of the basement. and so we were going to do it one way or another, and thank goodness for this movement called independent publishing. Had been growing since the late 60s, early 70s, into started really getting popular in the 80s, and so we said we're going to self-publish, and no matter what, we were going to do a comic book. So late one night in the studio, we were working on a first character that we created called the Fugitoid, and Pete used to watch to me, it was some of the most annoying TV shows, and no offense, but T.J. Hooker and the A-Team was not quite my cup of tea. But so my job at that time was to annoy him as much as possible while he was watching his favorite TV shows. And so late one night, I was thinking, like, man, if Bruce Lee was an animal, what would be the stupidest animal? Fast-moving martial artist, slow-moving turtle, and that was my first thought. And so that's where I did this first sketch on my hat of a turtle standing upright, nunchuck strapped to his arm, he had a mask on. And I put it on his desk and I said, Pete, this is going to be the next big thing, ha ha, Ninja Turtle. He did a drawing, studio one-upmanship, So he did a drawing, changed some things, and I had to top his drawing. And I said, well, one out of a group of them, so I did a sketch of all four. And when I did it in pencil, when Pete inked it in, he had a Teenage Mutant in the title. And we just laughed. And we said, this one, we're not sending it to anybody else. We're keeping this one, and let's figure out a way to tell a story. How these turtles got to be the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So that's when we started working on issue number 1, and coming up with the concept, the origin, like literally, and sometimes blatantly stealing ideas from our favorite comic books. Turtles' origin is very similar to Daredevil's. We can get into that later. That's pretty funny. So we did the first issue, and then I was very lucky that I had an uncle who sold art supplies, so we get discount art supplies, which was great. And so we put together this whole business proposal for him. We needed $1,200 to print 3,000 comics, the first issue. And came over, we gave him the pitch, and I think he was pretty sure he'd never be paid back. But he wrote that $1,200 check, and that's how the first issue happened. So early form of crowdfunding. You hit up your family first. So to get to the answer, it was so we put out the first issue, and we were like, and this is no joke. So we printed them locally in New Hampshire where we lived, and we went and Peter had this 1973 Vega that was like just literally falling apart as it came out the showroom. So we loaded up all the books, the turtle books, brought them back to our house in Dover, and we were so sure that we wouldn't sell many copies of these, so we used the boxes of books to make end tables and a coffee table. They were stacked all around the studio, and we were lucky this strange thing happened as you guys started buying it. And within 3 weeks, we'd sold out of issue 1. We went back to do issue 2, 6,000 copies, and at that time, I worked my regular summer job. I cooked lobsters on the coast of Maine. And so I went back to my summer job, Memorial to Labor Day, cooking lobsters for tourists. And so we get into that fall, and Pete and I, was keep in touch the whole time. He said that we're starting to get a lot of letters from people asking, well, when we're going to do a second issue? And we were like, we never thought we'd sell enough of the first issue to pay my uncle back. So we started working on the second issue, and there's a solicitation process to comics. You put out to distributors that you're doing the issue. They then place orders, and based on those orders, you print as much as they've ordered, plus a few extras. So in January of 1985, we had orders for 15,000 comics. We lost our minds in the best possible way, because Pete did some quick calculations. We figured, he said, if we do 6 of these a year, we'll make about $2,000 each, pre-tax. We can eat all the macaroni and cheese we want. We can pay our rent and draw comics. And so January of 1985, I quit all my other side jobs. Pete did the same, and we started drawing comics. And again, thanks to your support back in those days to this very day, started drawing turtles and have not stopped since. And so that's when we sort of felt that we had, and then we were like, well, we do issue 2. If that works, we do issue 3. If that works, and so, yeah, it's fantastic.
What do you think it was that resonated with people? I mean, at the time, and I want to ask about the imitators in a second, but at the time, it was a really wild concept. Why do you think it resonated with so many people?
Well, I think it was just, besides the sheer genius of the idea. No, one of the things that the first issue was very much a parody of all of our favorite things in comics. So it was like Frank Miller's Daredevil, Fantastic Four, X-Men. We sort of put all of this love that we had for comics into this one story, and it just was weird enough. I think, back in the day, we'd have people come up to the table, the earliest days, and they said, I read the title, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and WTF, they were like, what? And they picked it up, and some of them put them back down, but some of the people that picked it up and flipped through and just said, well, this is kind of interesting, this is kind of cool, it's different, very different at that time, and something clicked. And so the same thing with issue 2, we sold a bit more, and issue 3 I think jumped from issue 2 from was 15,000 copies, issue 3 was 35,000 copies, and it kept growing. And there was something weird, we couldn't, people would say the same question, they said, what do you think about it works? And I think it was everything that we loved about comics, in that, say, a lot of the Turtles had different personalities, like, say, the Fantastic Four. You had different individual personalities, some family, it was like this adoptive family. They would bicker and argue and fight, but when they needed to join together as a family or as a team, it worked. That's when they were the strongest. The fact that the Turtles were not of any race, creed, or color, anybody could imagine themselves as a particular turtle, and I noticed that even more prevalent in the animated series later on. Nobody was alienated. It wasn't that, and the Turtles were very much inspired by, say, Spider-Man, where they just wanted to be teenagers, but they had these powers. Everybody in there, including me, of course, is we all dream about being that hero, something that steps up and does the right thing in the right way, and does that heroic act that we all hope is that character inside us. So I think there was so many things that sort of clicked in a way that was like, well, it's different, it's interesting, and they're, so, but it took a while to figure out what we did. We just wrote to what we liked and what we loved. We wrote stories that we wanted to read, and we were, and still am. Basically, if I wasn't sitting at the table signing, I'd been walking around the floor with you guys and like buying shit and buying stuff and more stuff on my shelf. And my wife would be like, "No more stuff," and I'd be like, "Come on, we got room." But I think it was, we wrote for ourselves and we're fans. So.
I think those of us comic nerds that were here at the time when you're putting those out remember all the imitators. The radioactive black belt hamsters was one. What was it? Adolescent kung fu kangaroos or something like that.
It was like the first one was, and I have all of the issues from.
Oh, really?
It was like the adolescent radioactive black belt hamsters,
okay.
And then there was a mildly microwave prepubescent goat.
Oh, that's
There was a preteen gangrene kung fu kangaroos. So, and it was, there was, I think we counted at the height, something like 20, 21, adjective, noun sort of titles, and most of them, faded away, with this occasional biker mice from Mars or street sharks or something like that. But it was and there was an element like the hamsters, for example. Those guys wanted to draw comics like we did. They couldn't find a way in the same way we couldn't back in those days. So a lot of them were people that were sincere, trying to fulfill their dream like Peter and I did to draw comics. And then there was ones that were obviously rip-offs to try to make a quick buck and stuff. And even Marvel, I think Marvel never put it out, but there were ads in some of it was about a book. They were advertising a book coming called Adult Samurai Nuclear Elephants. And I don't know if they were actually going to do it, but there was a number of ads in the back of Marvel books that never came out. So.
I remember one, I think they just gave up, Miami Mice.
Miami Mice, it was so funny about, not to digress too much, but Miami Mice was produced by the son of a very famous underground cartoonist named Vaughn Bodie. And Vaughn Bodie was one of those guys. He did those Cheech Wizard and the Lizards. And if you Google Vaughn Bodie, you probably recognize his work from some of his early comic work in the late 60s, early 70s, but also graffiti artists all over the world do paintings to tribute to Vaughn Bodie. His son Mark, not only looks identical to his dad Vaughn, but also drew exactly like Vaughn. And so he wanted to jump, and he was drawing comics and couldn't find a way in, so he did Miami Mice, and we actually did a turtle crossover with Miami Mice. And then I worked on, we did, Mark and I did Turtles issue 18, which is the Bruce Lee tribute, and then we did Turtles 32. So I've worked with him a bunch of times. He's a great guy. But Miami Mice is one of those that's like, yeah, that's kind of pushing it. But
And I apologize, I didn't get to ask. But do you have a time limit today? 'Cause I
No,
know you
no,
started a little late.
this is my last, and thanks, and again, apologize for being late, but this is my last event for the show, so from here, they put me in a FedEx box with packing peanuts and they're shipping me. No, from here, I'm heading out, so I'm happy to hang out till
For a little
the
while,
end. So
okay.
if you guys are cool, let me know if you need to.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you
Thanks
didn't
for
have
asking.
a time limit that
Yep.
you had to go. So jumping to television, how did you feel seeing these like black and white creations of yours suddenly transform into like the Saturday morning cartoon?
Well, we were very lucky in, I mentioned Jack Kirby earlier, and there was a lot of other artists, not only Jack Kirby, that, Steve Ditko, who was probably did more work on creation of Spider-Man than Stan Lee will ever admit, or ever did admit. But there was a lot of these creators that created characters that were the reason Peter and I picked up a pencil and wanted to start drawing comics. And they also worked for, and that was the nature of the business, was that when you worked for a company at that time, everything was work for hire. So whatever was created was owned by the company you worked for. And so when you had characters like Jack Kirby created, and again, I don't want to say anything negative against Stan, because Stan Lee is responsible for some of the biggest successes, but also he's, was really repressive to a lot of artists, in my opinion, at that time. Jack did more of the creative stuff, in my opinion, than Stan did, but they never got to profit from it. So one of the things that we knew, and we were very aware of Jack's story and many others, so when we created the Turtles, we trademarked it, we copyrighted it, we fully owned it, and we said that nobody will ever do anything with the Turtles unless we have full say, full approval, the end, and that was it. And so when we were approached by a couple different agents, most of them Slime, but we were approached by this agent named Mark Friedman, who said, look, I think the Turtles can be much more than a comic book. And he said, yeah, we've heard that before. And he said, no, I'm serious, I think that this can be something. And he said, I want you to sign like the other, he said, I want you to sign a 5-year deal, exclusive to me, and blah, blah, blah. And we were like, never gonna happen. I said, tell you what, we'll sign a 30-day deal. If you find something interesting and bring it back to us that we have full approval over, then we'll continue for another 30 days. And we'll continue on until it goes, but we're not signing anything away to anybody. And we said we will have full approval over what the stories are, that it's adapted into a cartoon or movie, full approval of the likenesses. We said we have full approval over everything, and we're just not doing it. And he said, well, that's never going to happen. I said, well, fine. We were drawing comic books, and we were making a living. And so he had enough faith. He said, you know what, let me try. And so when we started working on, he went out and he pitched a couple deals. We brought on a company called Playmates to do the toys, because a lot of times back in those days, cartoons are mainly a 22-minute commercial for toys sales. And so he brought in Playmates, who agreed to develop the toys and would pay for the development of the animated show. And so then we brought in an animation studio. And the same thing, we went out and met with the animators and the writers and stuff, and we said, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And so we had full approval. So things like, and they said, well, they said stuff like, well, how do you tell them apart? And we said, the weapons, duh. And, they said, well, can we come up with something that helps tell them apart a little bit more, differentiate them. And so P came up with that idea of doing the different colored bandanas, which was perfect. We tried to shoot down the belts. We agreed to the belts just because, but we knew that it was being, the comic that was written for an older audience was going to be written very specifically for a 6-year-old, 7, young boys mostly. So the origins were softened, a lot of things were adapted, but Pete and I worked on every part of that. We approved every part of that. So anything that had happened, and we did that, we worked on 288 episodes of the cartoon with approval, with say, with what was being done and what was being said. And that same rolled over to the movies, anything that was done there. And then pretty much probably the first 20 years, anything any of you ever saw or your parents had to buy for you, for the first 20 years, Pete and I saw it, worked on it, and had some creation and say in it, and approved it or disapproved it. So it was such a fantastic, we had, it was one of those things that we were naive. we were successful as comic artists, and we didn't care. It's like, it either works or doesn't. We have to say or doesn't. We won't do it. And so we were very lucky that the more successful it became as a property, the more say we had to keep it true and original to the original idea.
Was there anything they came up with for the cartoon that surprised you, or you say, wow, that's a great idea, or was there something that sticks out in your mind?
No, we were very lucky in that when we started working with the first writing team on the cartoons was a really talented writer named David Wise, and his writing partner was Patty Howarth. And what we were lucky about in that we had already done, I think we started working on that, we had the first 15 issues of the Turtles, which is, you know, April and Casey and the van and the suit. We had so much established as an idea for the characters that we had a really great solid foundation to build the story from. We also had the first real development for mutants within the Turtle universe was done when we did the first role-playing game in 1985, and that was like, you know, mutant warthogs, rhino, and so many of those mutant characters and things that transitioned into the cartoon show, because the original comics we didn't have a lot of mutants. We had the aliens, we had the Utroms, which eventually became Krang, the Secret of the Ooze, and all that kind of stuff before it became the movie Secret of the Ooze. But when we started working with David, the adaptation process was already built off a strong idea. So he and she would bring in these ideas that were things that we never saw in our characters, based on what we developed at the time, because it was, again, more of a developed as a young person's children's idea. And so they came up with some really great ideas. Even like I remember brainstorming on things like the word cowabunga, and people said, well, where did cowabunga come from? And that was one idea that David had, but it was based on the Annette Furticello, Frankie Avalon beach blanket bingo movies.
Oh, wow. That's
You know, I grew up in a small town in Maine, so it was like when you in Maine, you know, like you see like cowabunga, hang 10, dude, and we're like, what planet is this from? But so some of that surfer attitude for Michelangelo specifically, and each one had their personalities. But they brought some wonderful ideas, and it was just we feel like Pete and I felt lucky because we had a whole different kind of playground to play in. And so when it was a much younger us, some really fun stuff came out of that. We enjoyed it so much. And the hot rodding teenagers from Dimension X, you know, that kind of stuff.
The toy line became kind of legendary from the cartoon. What was your reaction to seeing those action figures of the characters you created, and they're lining the toy shelves and they're flying off the shelves?
Well, it was such an interesting process because, again, because Peter and I had full say and approval, we made many trips to California, not only to sit with the animators through the development process of that, but we would go to the Playmates offices, and it was, there's actually from some of the documentaries out there, there's like Peter and I, you know, hanging out in the Playmates offices with some of the early prototypes. So they developed a bunch of different prototypes, and so we were sort of part of that process, and like the thing for us, much like with the first Turtle issue, when we were doing it, is like try to do the best job we can, tell the best story we can for that first issue. So the cartoon series, much like the first issue, we never believed it would actually happen. Like, we wanted to do the best job we could throughout the process of it, and we wanted to have our say and approval. So like the first cartoon series, for example, they only produced 5 episodes. And it was like the 5 episodes that Playmates were in the fun while the development of the Turtle action figures and all that stuff. And so even Playmates, through the whole development process, they waited until the cartoon aired, and if it bombed, they wouldn't do the toys. But if it had some success, then they would do the toys. So the first 5 episodes, and actually, quick digression, do you know who wrote the theme song, the Turtles? Chuck Lorre, you know Chuck Lorre? 2.5 Men, Big Bang Theory. So when he first started in Hollywood, he wrote jingles. And so he wrote the Turtles theme song, which is cool. So they aired the first 5 episodes between Christmas 1987, that's holiday for kids. And the ratings were really big enough that when January, then Playmates pulled the trigger and decided, because the most expensive part of creating action figures is the tooling. Back in those days, these big giant metal balls that they have to stamp and sculpt. So once that, the success of the cartoon show, then the first 5 episodes, then they agreed to do 8 more, plus make the toys. So June of 1988, we had heard through Playmates the toys had shipped. They were landing in stores. KB Toys was the toy store of the iconic toy store back in those times. And so we actually didn't believe they were actually going to be on the toy shelf at a toy store. So we drove. We lived in Northampton, Massachusetts, down to Springfield, Massachusetts, to the closest KB. And so it's so funny, we were walking back down towards the action figure aisle. As we kind of got to the action figure aisle, this mom is pulling this young boy out of the aisle saying, "No, I'm not buying you one of those stupid Ninja Turtles." And we were like, what have we done? But that was where we then saw them on the toy shelf, and it was pretty fantastic. But it was, and even Playmates said it's, based on what they shipped, and they had made more for that Christmas holiday, and they said if it works at Christmas, then we'd do it for another year. If it doesn't work, then you're going to be in the discount bins, and that's it. So, but the fact that it started and worked was thank you to your parents. He's looking at one. No, it's funny. Somebody asked me this earlier, and it was like back in the early days, because we have so many wonderful fans that have been fans since the beginning. But I remember clearly in the early days of Pete and I doing signings, and there would be this, fabulously excited young person coming up to get this stuff signed and have some of the toys. That'd either be a mom, a dad, either or both, and they were just spitting daggers at you. And you could read their mind going like, do you know how many toy stores I went to find Donatello, because I could only find 3 of the 4, or spent a Christmas Eve putting together that stupid sewer layer, or stepped on Leonardo's sword on the way to the restroom in the middle of the night. But that's fantastic.
Did you have a favorite toy of the sets?
To me, I love to me the play sets were awesome, but I think series 2, they did Krang and the android body. And it was like Krang was from the original comic books, but the android body was something that Peter and I developed based on the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters. And so I just loved it. It was like this big android body with a little Krang and stuff. I love that.
So beyond the Ninja Turtles, you also took over Heavy Metal magazine, is that right?
That's right.
So what drew you to that project, and how did that compare creatively to working on the Turtles?
What's so fantastic about Heavy Metal magazine, and if you don't know what it is, Heavy Metal magazine was, the first issue was published in 1977, and it was around the time where, comics had Comics Code approved comics that were written for people 12 years old and under, and there was a time when guys like Frank Miller and Alan Moore were coming on the scene and doing comic books written for older audiences based on European comics, and European comics were intended for older audiences. They had they had Asterix and they had Tintin and they had all these wonderful younger readers, but they were comics written for adults, like novels. The first time I went to a comic store in Paris, there were 25 adults in there and 2 kids, and so Heavy Metal magazine started bringing that material from Europe, translating and publishing it here. And so in 1977, I bought the first issue off the newsstand, and it was life-changing because I loved comic books, but comic books just seemed really juvenile. And you see Frank Miller and people starting to bump them up for older audiences. But when I saw Heavy Metal magazine, it was comics specifically written for an older audience, intelligent science fiction, all kinds of past, present, future stories for adults. And I fell in love with it, and it made me, it cemented the idea that comics are not just for kids. Comics are for kids of all ages, if you will. And so I was a huge fan, and one of the most exciting things in it was, I think it was May of '85, issue of Heavy Metal. One of the reviewers reviewed Turtles #1 and said it's an ode to Von Bodie, and so it was that was my proudest moment ever. It's in my favorite magazine. So it was just funny because Heavy Metal inspired me to continue drawing comics, because I knew that comics would be for all ages, and we could keep doing this and try to make a living out of it. And so when I made enough money from the Turtles, I had an opportunity to buy Heavy Metal magazine, and I did in 1990, and continued to publish it for 22 years. And it was just, it's one of those passion projects that I love so much, because besides being an artist myself, and artists, we're our own worst enemies, we're terrible. We're our own worst critics, and so we admire everybody around us except for our own work. And I read Heavy Metal magazine. I was just so impressed with the creativity and stuff. And that was seeing comic artists from all over the world. We did stuff from artists from Japan, Spain, Germany, France. It was just, it's great. I loved it. It was a really wonderful, wonderful time. I enjoyed that.
Was there any particular artist that influenced your own work?
Very much so. And it's actually, it's funny that out of all the fantastic artists from overseas, Mobius, Belial, people like that. But it was an American artist that was published in the first couple issues of Heavy Metal, a guy named Richard Corben, which was Kansas City, and he was just like, to me it was like, because one of the things I liked about Jack Kirby is Jack Kirby did very exaggerated figures, and every panel seemed to explode because it was like unnatural motions, and it was like bam, bam, everything was like super dramatic and over the top. And Corben was very much like that. It was like his figures were very cartoony in the sense they were cartoony in design, but painted in a very realistic fashion, if that makes sense. Google Corben. But I just adored his work, and it was a big influence on me too.
Well, I have plenty more questions, but I would love for the fans to get a chance to ask some questions. Does anybody have a question? You, sir, way in the back.
Yes, I do have a question. I was going to ask, what was your inspiration? Like, why? What was the inspiration for like the turtles? Like, it was like, a turtle, perfect.
No, that was because a lot of people asked over the years. They go like, "Well, what was it about a turtle that you chose? Why did you choose a kangaroo or a sloth or something?" And it really goes back to two things specifically. One is I grew up in a very small town in Maine, and my grandmother lived on a lake. And on the lake, there was a kind of a marshy sort of runoff area full of turtles. Painter turtles, snapping turtles, and I was just, as a kid, would go up there all the time in the summer, and I was just fascinated that, to me, they seemed to be like direct descendants of dinosaurs. They're just these fantastic creatures, and really enjoyed them. So I was always a huge fan of turtles, period, and dinosaurs, of course. And then the other thing was the first movie I ever saw in a movie theater was Planet of the Apes. And it was life changing. It was one of those things. So like mutant animals, mutant apes, and stuff. And then that led to Jack Kirby for a period of time left Marvel, and he went to work for DC Comics, and he created a comic book series called Commandy, the Last Boy on Earth. And Commandy was based on kind of a furtherance of Planet of the Apes. So humans as characters were reduced to sort of slaves and cattle sort of thing, and then apes and tigers and you name it, animals ruled the earth, mutant animals. And so that was really, both of those things had a huge effect. So I said, it's like, and that was part of the fantasy aspect of inspiration of guys like Kirby, which was like, if you can think it and you can draw it, who's to say you're wrong? It's like, so mutant gorillas and mutant, so it was a combination of all those things. I think when the idea of doing Bruce Lee as an animal, especially a mutant animal, was definitely affected from those things. So, but turtles are my grandmother's.
Ma'am, you had a question?
Yeah. What led you to come up with the names for the turtles?
Thank you for asking. And that's one of my favorite parts. Is long before TV shows like Big Bang Theory made the word geek cool, I was the one of the geeks sitting with my friend David Peabody and Jim McNorton in the corner of the lunchroom that were shunned. We were geeks, and not only we read comic books, but I also liked art history. I was like, and I was fascinated by Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and all those things. And in fact, in high school, I had a really wonderful art teacher who was fantastic. And so for the senior class, a number of us were picked to do murals at our high school. about the lockers and different periods in art. And of course she said, "You're doing Renaissance." And so I did my tribute to Leonardo da Vinci. And so when Peter and I were talking about the origin of the turtles, the creation of the turtles, you know, the bad guys and this, and of course we kept sort of sidestepping the names because we couldn't quite nail it down. And so at first it was, I said they should be traditional Asian names because of the history and the culture of the Asian component in the story. And we were like, well, it's a really silly idea, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's not funny enough. So, you know, Doug, Bob, Steve, you know, still not quite funny enough. So I just blurted out, I said, wouldn't it be funny if we named one like Leonardo and Michelangelo, and then Raphael was a student of Michelangelo's, and our barometer was laughing. So it was like, so we said, oh, that's funny, we should do that. And I love telling the story where the fourth, it was a discussion for about 2 weeks, and I can't remember if it ended in a coin toss or something, but Peter liked Donatello as a sculptor, and I liked a sculptor named Bernini much better. And so we kind of went back and forth for a while. So Donatello was almost named Bernini. But I think wisely, you know, for succumb to sort of Peter. Well, Donatello, Michelangelo, Leonardo, but that was definitely I loved actually this a couple years ago. My wife and I finally got to go to Italy and get to go to the Sistine Chapel and all that stuff. So just going into Vatican City and all that. So like you see all these amazing like Raphaels and all the stuff, in the Sistine Chapel, but there's this main centerpiece in the center of Vatican City with a lot. Oftentimes the Pope will give do Sunday services, and the whole sculpture around the thing is like it's 2 stories high. This thing all carved out of wood by Bernini. So it's like, so we do like, you know, the lost cousin, you know, something. Oh, Bernini's back. But good question, thank you.
Oh, lots yes, ma'am.
So if you could have like the Turtles do a crossover with any character ever, or even if you have done like said character, like who would it be?
It's a great question too. It's funny because I mentioned Commandy a little bit earlier, and so I pitched to this is going back a number of years. So I pitched to IDW, who's managing the Turtles program. We were working on that, the comics, and so I asked them to pitch to DC Comics doing a Turtles Commandy crossover because it was perfect. It's like, you know, there's time travel in different dimensions, and the Turtles going from New York City, and Commandy being a boy in a mutant animal world would want to be in New York City, and the Turtles, you know, they'd feel more at home in a planet ruled by mutant animals. So I asked Ted Adams, who come to pitch it to DC, and he came back and he said, well, DC said, nobody knows who Commandy is. Why don't you do Turtles Batman? And we were like, didn't know that was on the table. And so luckily we were able to do a fantastic 3 series of 60 series of Turtles Batman crossover. And that was fantastic. James Tinian, if you've never seen his work, he's just a fantastic writer. And so he wrote the series, and my friend Freddie Williams, who's a fantastic artist, drew it. And that was actually, it was the funniest thing, that probably the geekiest fan moment I ever had was like drawing the first. So I got to do a cover for each of the series, and then worked on some of them more later. But I'm drawing the first cover with Turtles and Batman on the same cover, and I'm like, I felt like I was getting punked, you know. They're never gonna really publish this, right? And, but no, it was a dream. So we did that, and then they did Turtles Ghostbusters. They did Turtles Power Rangers. It was just fantastic. It was really fun. Turtles Naruto, I think was Naruto, which is more recent. There's a couple other ones, but my pitch recently has been Turtles Daredevil because the origins. So that would be a dream. One day maybe.
Let's get somebody over here. No, okay. Yeah.
Yes. Is there a storyline from the comics that you'd like to see adapted on like the big screen?
You know, that's really good question, and it was like there's a couple of them. But what we were so lucky about when we did the first Turtle movie was we had a fantastic director, Steve Barron, who just was a dream come true. In that when we had our first meeting with him, he had actually gone through all the original Turtle books, like the ones that Peter and I did. And if you look at, there's in some cases actually scenes that we actually drew in those issues that show up on the screen. So he picked out, like he said, well, we're going to use most of Turtles 1, obviously, because you have this, and this. And then there was this whole scene where we did a one-shot called, based on Leonardo, Leonardo's story, which was where the foot finally quarter him, and in the movie they ended up making it Raphael instead of Leo. And at the end he comes crashing through the window of the second time around shop. They have a big showdown, then they go out into the country, where, so Casey's there, April's there. So he picked so many wonderful parts of what Pete and I did originally and adapted in a way that we were just like, it was just fantastic. And that was the closest that we've ever come to somebody adapting the original stories that Pete and I did. And he had sort of a foot in the Turtles original black and white series and the cartoon series, like April with the yellow raincoat, Judith Hogue, the wonderful Judith Hogue was the first April and the best April, and she's fantastic. And so that was the closest we ever came to seeing it, and that's why it'll always be my favorite movie. It's the closest to our version of that, and the writer Todd Langdon just knocked it out of the park. So the rest of them, like Secret of the Ooze, which I know a lot of people like, was more closer to the live action, to the cartoon series. Secret of the Ooze and Ernie Reyes and that stuff. But I think right now it's like I'm excited. It was it's knock on wood, we'll see. But right now they've been Paramount's developing Last Ronin as a movie. So we're hoping. I've had 4 or 5 conversations with the writer. The script has been approved, and right now a company called Skydance is buying Paramount, so there's a bunch of transitional stuff. So we'll see. I hope, and they've said that they're going to do it as a live action. They said they're going to do it R-rated.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
But it's also Hollywood, and I've rarely believed anything Hollywood's ever said. So.
I hope it's close to the comic, because I know he got very emotional with it. He just recently finished it, and we're looking forward to reading the second one.
Thank
Trying
you.
to get hands on that, but yeah, he's excited for that announcement for the movie.
Yeah,
No, thank you. Because it was one of those things when it had come up a number of times. Like the book kept selling and selling thanks to you guys, and it was like, so Paramount coming back and they go like, everybody keeps asking us to do live action Last Ronin, but we don't want to mess with Seth Rogen's Turtles, the animated ones. We feel like it would confuse the audiences. But they came back like 7, 8 months later, and they sort of because Hollywood sometimes takes a while to catch up on certain things. And they said, well, we decided we think both worlds can exist, And I think when they saw the dollar signs of like Deadpool, Wolverine, and things like that, like maybe we should read that. So that's what inspired them to sort of go ahead and try to develop it. It's pretty intense as a story, and I think there's room for those audiences. And I love Mutant Mayhem, by the way. If you guys haven't seen that movie, it was hilarious. It's great.
I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Of course, yeah, I'm good with that.
Sir?
Do you ever think about doing something where there's a dream sequence or something like that where the turtles are all grown up with families and what all that would be like?
It's so funny, and Pete and I kept saying we wanted to do it. It was like, because we were big fans of like Seinfeld. And so we were thinking like, if you imagine the turtles like 65, living in an apartment in Brooklyn or something, like Larry David, and you're like, boy, it's like an oven in here, You see my Geritol? Oh my God! But no, we thought about doing that, and that was that I think would be hilarious, to be honest. They'll never do it. But no, that was definitely part of the inspiration. And the Dark Knight, of course, for Last Ronin was one of the things that like what Frank Miller did was having Batman at the end, as at 65 and all that kind of stuff, and still trying to do the right thing, and so that was definitely an inspiration. But yeah, it'd be fun. That'd be a fun one shot just to do like 32 pages of turtles living in an apartment in Brooklyn or Queens. Oh, is that Spider-Man? What? He's still around? Boy.
Gentleman in blue.
With you being a lifelong artist, did you ever think that there would be something that you created that you would be drawing pretty much almost daily now for 40 plus years? And was there any time where you were like, you know what, I can't draw another turtle?
No, the thing is, it's like it was such a passion, such a dream, and it was and Peter and I have talked about this a bunch of times. If it wasn't the turtles, we'd still draw comics. We would have found a job somewhere doing comics. So we loved it so much. And the fact that we got lucky, I was 21 when the first issue of the Turtles came up, and I'm 64 now. So, boy, it's like an oven in here. No, but no, it's just, that's the amazing part of the history of the Turtles. And, when I tell people come and stand in my line, I say I have the greatest job because I have the greatest fans. It's not malarkey. It's true. It's like, I was drawing turtles on Thursday before I came here. When I go home tomorrow night, I'm going to be finishing up a couple of deadlines that people are already mad at me. I'm running late on, but I'll be drawing comics one way or another. But a funny digression is there's an artist named Simon Bisley, and he's a British artist, and we've worked together for years. He was one of the main creators and artists on a character named Lobo and many, many other things. And we did a turtle story called Body Count, which is probably the most violent, over-the-top turtle story. It's based on a bunch of John Woo movies. And I showed Simon some John Woo movies, and he's like, "Oh, we got to do the longest running gunfight in comics featuring the turtles." And I'm like, "Sure." And so we worked on it together. But we used to talk about it. So we work in a studio together. I'd either go to his place or come to LA when I was working there, and we used to have these conversations. We're like, "Well, what would we do if we couldn't find work as comic artists?" And we went on this whole elaborate thing of like designing what our shopping carts would look like. And I was like, so we'd be homeless, obviously. So we were thinking like we'd design these shopping carts that had like knobby tires, so the all-terrain shopping carts. And some of them could fold down, so the camps would be off the ground, and some of those little electric lights and stuff. It went on for weeks. We definitely probably should have done some design. We definitely thought we'd be homeless if we couldn't draw comics.
Let's try a couple more. You, sir, you've been waiting patiently.
So I wanted to first ask, how was your? I have two questions, if you don't mind. But the first one was.
We have plenty of time. I have to see you too. We're going to stop at midnight, and that's it.
How was it being able to portray your lifelong dream of being a garbage man on a feature film? The second question is, it seems like you guys had, or you had a lot of creative control over the Ninja Turtles in its entirety. You had the ability to kind of make sure that it stayed within your guys' vision. Is there anything that did occur that you do wish, looking back on, that you did a little bit differently, or that may not have worked, that you wish you could have changed?
Both. Again, good questions. Thank you. So the funny thing about so Pete and I spent a lot of time on set, obviously, working on the first Turtle movie, and then a bunch of time on set when it was being filmed in North Carolina. And so we were down there, and Steve Barron had come up with this idea. The director came up with this idea. He said, "Hey, why don't you guys do a cameo?" And Pete, who's incredibly shy, bless his buttons, but I'm not. I'm like, yeah. And so the cameo was this: so they were setting up the garbage truck sequence. The question right at the end. Spoiler alert. Sorry. So they set up the garbage truck sequence. So the scene where it's like two of the turtles are talking, cracking jokes and fighting foot soldiers, and behind them there's like this amazing martial artist in a 80-pound rubber suit fighting like 12-foot guys, and blah blah blah. And then you look past the camera down the street, and then there's about a half a block away, there's this garbage truck that comes out with a garbage man walking next to it, and this garbage man looks down the street, sees what's happening, drops the two garbage bags, and runs back down the street. That's me. So, the best part is, it's like they got me in costume, makeup, scary. So I don't blame them. But makeup, I had a garbage man outfit and all this stuff. So I'm expecting they filmed a scene he looks down the street, he goes, And so I tell everybody in the world I'm going to be in the movie. And so when you see the movie, you see that scene and you see this black blob, this little shape go, that's me. There's no close-ups, no cut, no anything. So my line is like, well, that's me, and I was also a stormtrooper in Star Wars. You don't see much of me there either. No, but it was one of those things that was kind of frustrating that, they did that. But Pete, in his awesomeness, he was like our living Donatello, so he had like the Casio calculator watch and the camera, and so he videotaped it, the scene, and it showed up online, 6, 8, 10 years ago, whatever. But NECA, who's been doing these fantastic toys, made one of me, the character. So you never actually get to see me in the movie, but it's like that was really nice. And then I would love the fact that I love the Mutant Mayhem movie, which I mentioned was I got to be the good human. I was the voice of that. And the Mutant Mayhem movie, and the voice of Ice Cream Kitty. But I practiced that for weeks. And most of the second part,
So I was asking if, because you had so much control over it, if there's anything that you wish you had done differently or may have changed looking back on everything.
No, there was so much of it just evolved naturally and organically, and I think, if I had one frustration was sort of Pete and I as a relationship and as the company was after the cartoon series came off, we developed it was in development for Turtles, the Next Mutation, and Pete, and there was nothing, don't read too much into it, but the idea for the Next Mutation was this concept of a 4th Turtle movie at New Line, where we had a 5th turtle introduced that we named it Kirby, as a male turtle, and Margaret Lesh at Fox and Chaim Sabam decided they wanted a female turtle. And I thought that was a great idea. We love, our Sarah Connors and Lieutenant Ripley. I love a good, strong female character. And Pete, I think, was so ingrained with the idea that it was a tribute to Jack Kirby and it was a thing that he didn't like it. And so he said, I'm going to step away and do it while we developed the live action series featuring Venus de Milo, which I thought that series had a lot of great stuff in it, but fans just hated it.
How did you cross over?
Well, our revenge was, Tom Waltz and I, we wrote the first 100 issues of Turtles together at IDW, and by the time we got to issue 50, Tom and I we said, we're bringing a female turtle into the IDW comic line, one way or another. And so in issue 51 of Turtles, we introduced a character named Jenica, which was a foot assassin, which then, she was supposed to be like 4 or 5 issues, and she had her thing, and then we fell in love with her, so we ended up turning her into, turned her to the good side of the force, if you will, and developed her as a character, and then was able to turn her into the 5th turtle, like the She-Hulk magic, and transfusion from Leo to her made her. And I'm sure the fans embraced it, and we love that we now have a female turtle.
Did you have a question?
Yep.
Way over there, you've been so patient.
Yeah, one of my questions was what inspired the making of Venus and Jenica, and another question was, is there any personalities, like either people you've met or celebrities, that you based their personalities onto the Turtles?
Yes. Well, I love that because of the creation, that we an amazingly talented writer and artist named Sophie Campbell. Remember the Next Mutation? She loved the character Venus, and so when she took over, when Tom and I stepped away at issue 100 to start working on Last Ronin, Sophie came in as a writer. She ended up writing issue 101 to 150, and she had some really wonderful ideas to bring some of these characters back in a way like Token Razor from the movie, the Secret of the Ooze, and other different things, Mutant Town, a lot more mutants and the relationships. And so she wanted to bring Venus back, and originally Nickelodeon said no, but we had Jenica, so Jenica became, we developed her as a character more and more within Sophie's stories, but then she came up with this idea to have this mad scientist create Frankenstein, I guess, the Frankenstein version of a female turtle, which then we get to name her Venus. And so we get to bring her back, and that worked, which was really great. And second part, because I had a good answer for that.
Were there any personalities from
Yes.
people you met or celebrities that you put onto the turtles or characters?
100%. No, actually, like Michelangelo, for example, was my best friend Steve Levine, who was a turtles artist. He was the funniest guy in high school. We used to call him our own Robin Williams. He's the inspiration for Michelangelo. Peter Laird is definitely a living Donatello. And other ones came from different stereotypes of personalities, but my favorite one is when Peter and I created Casey Jones in 1985 and the first Raphael one-shot. In 1986, a movie came out called Big Trouble in Little China, and I just love that movie, and Kurt Russell I think is just fantastic, and so I've never written Casey Jones since Big Trouble in Little China without thinking, what would Jack Burton do?
So we have time for one more?
Sure, yeah.
Way in the back, you've been waiting very patiently.
I was wondering, is there anything that the writers did for Rise of the TMNT that you really, really liked?
I liked everything they did. In fact, that they made, like, you know, I think it was even part of the inspiration for some of what Seth Rogen did, and Mutant Mayhem was they made Splinter kind of short and chubby and more of a Yoda character, like watching his stories, you know, like his soap operas and stuff. But no, Ann and Andy, who worked on the last couple of seasons of the 2012 series, they had such wonderful ideas. And my favorite part was we'd never explored, and that actually goes back to the Big Trouble in Little China aspect, which was this whole mystical Asian underground of, like, you know, it almost drifted towards Miyazaki stuff, which I love, you know, it's like and so they had brought a lot of that into, and I feel like they weren't able to explore that as much as they could, because I think it was it was a great idea. There were so many great ideas, I think, in Rise that just never got fully explored the way they could. And it was tough because the change from what they did with the 2012 series, which was great, I thought it was really fantastic. The transition from doing that, which had become really popular with fans, and then doing the switch up to Rise, I think a lot of fans stepped back and went like, and which is too bad because there's some great stuff in there.
So aside from the possible Last Ronin movie, that's all hope.
Yeah.
Are there any projects coming up that you're able to tell us about?
We actually we're writing Last Ronin 3 right now, which is because we looked at after we did Last Ronin, and we never thought there'd be a second part. We kind of left the door open with that last scene with April and Casey with the 4 turtles in the terrarium. So then Last Ronin 2, when that worked as well as it did, we were able to jump in, because Tom and I love the Ronin-verse very much. So we jumped into 16 years later, which was Last Ronin 2, which just completed. I think the hardcover just came out a couple weeks ago, and we're working on Last Ronin 3. And I would break it down to sort of, if you imagine, say, Star Wars: A New Hope. Last Ronin 2 is The Empire Strikes Back. And Last Ronin 3 is kind of Return of the Jedi kind of concept. Is the way we're approaching it. There's a lot more into it. So Last Ronin 3 is a top priority right now, and then we're doing a lot of other turtle covers and stuff, and some side projects that are not turtles. I'm doing a series called Drawing Blood, which I really love, which is running incredibly late. No, mostly it's still like I'm having way too much fun doing turtles right now, so that's going to be the focus for at least the next year.
That's amazing. All right. Well, I would like to thank the audience here for their great questions and for joining us today, and just for being here at the con. And let's give a round of applause.
Hey. Well, I was going to say, like I started off, thank you guys so much. We had such a wonderful time down here. Here in Tucson, and thank you for standing in the line and making me feel so loved, and I wouldn't have the greatest job ever again without you guys, so thank you very much. So hopefully we get to see you back here again soon. Enjoy the rest of the show. I think we got 8 minutes to hit the floor. But thank you again, guys. And thank you, that was awesome. I appreciate it.
By the way, the turtles fan is very hard to find.
The what is?
The turtles fan.
Really? Is it right now? Is that what?
No, the toy.
The toy. Yeah, no, it is. Because I know they did like that.
Thank you for listening to the Creative Play-In Podcast Network. If you enjoyed our show, please check out D&D Journey of the 5th Edition and Ragnarok Enroll a Scion Hero to Ragnarok Story. Also, check out our Patreon page for more content and behind-the-scenes things, as well as joining us for a one-shot game or two.